My sister's wedding was supposed to be perfect. White flowers, champagne, 100 guests smiling. The only problem was me. 2 weeks before, my parents sat me down and told me I was not allowed to give a speech. No explanation, just a ban. So I did the only thing I could. I recorded the truth on my phone, slipped it to the DJ with a note, and waited. When the toasts began, the music stopped. The room went silent. And every word I had never been allowed to say started playing for everyone to hear. That message changed everything. Here, why I recorded it. I'm Maya, the bride's older sister. For years, my family treated me like a problem they wanted to hide. They banned me from the speech because they knew I wouldn't lie anymore. But the in-laws heard something they couldn't ignore, and they started asking questions at the reception that no one wanted to answer. The question everyone's asking is simple. What did I say that was so dangerous? The answer goes back years before that wedding. Back to when the silence first began. My name is Maya. I'm the older sister, and for 7 years I was the family secret. Let me take you back. My family is small. Mom, Dad, my sister Chloe, and me. We grew up in a brick house on Oak Street, the kind with a front porch swing and a dog that barked at mail trucks. To anyone looking in, we were normal, but inside there was a dividing line. Chloe was the golden child. Straight A's, captain of the volleyball team, homecoming court. I was the difficult one. That's what my mother called me. Difficult. Not because I did anything wrong. Because I asked questions they didn't want to answer. When I was 15, I asked why my aunt stopped coming to Thanksgiving. My mother's face went cold. We don't talk about that. When I was 17, I asked why my father's business partner suddenly moved out of state. My father said, "It's complicated, Maya." When I was 19, I found a stack of letters hidden in the attic. Letters my grandmother had written to my mother, begging to see me. My mother had never given them to me. I asked why. She said your grandmother was toxic. I said she died alone. My mother didn't answer. That was the moment I understood. My family kept secrets, and anyone who tried to expose them became the enemy. Chloe and I were close when we were little. We shared a room until I was 12. We built forts under the dining table. We made up songs about our cat. But as we got older, the gap widened. Chloe learned to stay quiet, to smile, to be the daughter they wanted. I kept pushing. When I was 20, I told my parents I was moving out. My mother cried. Not because she'd miss me, because the neighbors would talk. Chloe was 16 then. She watched me pack. She didn't say goodbye. That was the beginning of the silence. For the next 7 years, I barely saw my family. I lived in a studio apartment across town. I worked at a bookstore. I built a small life. Chloe went to college, got engaged, became everything they wanted. I got holiday texts. Generic ones. Happy birthday, Merry Christmas, nothing more. Then the wedding invitation arrived. Floral envelope, calligraphy address. I opened it in my kitchen. Chloe and Daniel, June 15th. The venue was the country club on the hill, the one my parents had talked about for years. I RSVP'd yes. I thought maybe things could change. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was tight. "Maya, we need to talk about the wedding." I felt cold. She said Chloe and Daniel would like you to attend as a guest, but they don't want any drama. I said I wouldn't cause drama. She paused. "And they don't want you to give a speech." I asked why. She said because you have a habit of saying things that make people uncomfortable. I said like the truth. She said like things that don't belong at a wedding. I asked if Chloe felt that way. My mother said it was a mutual decision. She said if you can't respect that, maybe you shouldn't come. I said I'll be there. I'll be quiet. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The invitation was still on the counter. I thought about Chloe. I thought about the letters in the attic. I thought about all the years of silence. And I made a decision. I would go, I would smile. I would wear the right dress, but I would not be silent, not anymore. The wedding day was perfect. White tents, roses everywhere, a string quartet playing by the pool. I arrived alone. My mother kissed my cheek like it hurt. My father shook my hand like he was meeting a stranger. Chloe was radiant. She hugged me and whispered, "Thanks for understanding." I hugged her back and said nothing. The ceremony was quick. The reception was loud. I sat at a table near the back next to Daniel's aunt and a cousin I'd never met. The food was good. The champagne was cold. I watched my family laugh and dance and pretend everything was fine, and I waited. The toasts began. The best man told a story about Daniel's college road trip. The maid of honor talked about Chloe's kindness. Then my father stood up. He raised his glass. He said, "I'm so proud of my daughter." He looked at Chloe. He didn't look at me. The room clapped. And then, between the speeches and the cake cutting, I slipped the DJ a USB drive. I'd recorded it 3 nights before, alone in my apartment with the microphone on my laptop. I'd written it twice, then thrown away the paper and just spoken from my heart. I said every word I'd been told not to say, about the letters, about the secrets, about the years of silence, about how much I still loved my sister, even though I didn't know if she loved me back. The DJ looked at me. I said, "Play it after the first dance." He nodded. He didn't ask questions. The first dance ended. Chloe and Daniel swayed to a slow song. Guests wiped tears. The DJ faded the music. He announced, "Now we have a special message from a family member." My mother's head snapped toward the DJ. She looked around. She didn't see me. The recording began. My voice filled the tent. That's where Act 1 ends. What I said next changed everything. My voice came through the speakers, clear and steady, saying the one thing my family had spent years trying to bury. "Hi, Chloe. It's Maya. I know you didn't want me to speak tonight, but I couldn't let this day pass without telling you something I should have said a long time ago." The tent went quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes before applause, the kind that comes before a fall. I saw my mother's hand freeze midair, her wine glass suspended. My father's jaw tightened. Chloe stared at the DJ table like she didn't understand what was happening. "I remember when we were kids," my recording continued. "You used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. You'd whisper, 'Maya, I'm scared.' And I'd say, 'I've got you.' I meant it then. I mean it now. But somewhere along the way, we stopped talking. Not because we stopped loving each other, because we were told not to." Daniel's mother, Patricia, leaned toward her husband. Her lips moved. "What is this?" Her husband shrugged, but his eyes were fixed on the speakers. "I found letters in the attic," my voice said. "Letters from Grandma begging to see us. Mom said Grandma was toxic, but I read those letters. They were full of love. And I realized that the person who was toxic was Grandma. It was the silence she was forced into." My mother stood up. Her chair scraped the floor. "Turn it off," she said to the DJ. Her voice was thin, stretched. The DJ looked at me. I shook my head. He stayed still. "I'm not here to ruin your wedding, Chloe. I'm here because I love you, and because I'm done being the family secret. I'm done being the one who gets erased. You wanted me at the back table. You wanted me silent, but I am your sister, and I deserve to be seen." The recording ended. The tent was dead silent. Then Chloe started crying, not quiet tears, the kind that shakes your whole body. She turned to Daniel. She said, "I didn't know." Daniel looked at my mother. My mother looked at the floor. Patricia stood up. She walked over to me. She was wearing a navy dress and pearl earrings. She looked like someone who had run a corporation. She said, "Maya, is that true? About the letters?" I nodded. She turned to my mother. "Susan, did you hide letters from your mother?" My mother didn't answer. Patricia said, "I think we need to talk." That's when the night split open. I'll tell you what happened next, but first I need to go back, because the letters weren't the only secret, and the wedding wasn't the first time my family tried to silence me. The summer I turned 19, I worked at a diner on the highway. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the regulars knew your name. One night, my Aunt Linda showed up. She was the one who stopped coming to Thanksgiving. I hadn't seen her in 4 years. She sat in my booth and ordered a slice of pie. Then she said, "Your mother told me not to contact you, but I think you deserve to know the truth." She told me my grandmother hadn't been toxic. She'd been depressed. After my grandfather died, she struggled. My mother got tired of it. She cut her off. Then she told everyone that Grandma was a manipulator. She made my father believe it. She made Chloe believe it. And she made sure no one ever talked to Grandma again. Grandma died alone in a nursing home. My mother didn't go to the funeral. She said it was too painful. I asked my mother about this the next week. She denied everything. She said Linda was a liar. She said, "If you bring this up again, you're not welcome in this house." I didn't bring it up again. I just stopped coming home. But that wasn't the only secret. 2 years later, I was helping a friend move into a new apartment. We found an old box of my father's things that had been left in storage. Inside were documents, loan agreements, letters from a bank. It turned out my father's business partner, Uncle Mark, hadn't moved out of state. He'd been forced out. My father had taken money from their joint account, borrowed against the business without telling him. When Mark found out, my father threatened to sue him for embezzlement. Mark left town to avoid the legal battle. My father told everyone Mark had stolen from him. The opposite was true. I confronted my father. He said, "That's not your concern." I said, "You ruined a man's reputation." He said, "He was going to ruin us." I said, "So you lied." He said, "Sometimes lies protect the family." That was the phrase I heard over and over. Lies protect the family. The family that couldn't handle the truth. The family that needed a scapegoat. The family that needed me to be the difficult one so they could all be easy. By the time Chloe's wedding arrived, I had a choice. I could be the silent guest at the back table, or I could be the sister who finally said what no one else would. I chose the recording. Back in the tent, Patricia was leading my mother toward the garden. My father followed. Daniel's father, Robert, stayed with Chloe. He put his arm around her. He said, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll get to the bottom of this." I stood there, alone except for the DJ, who gave me a small nod. The string quartet started playing again, trying to fill the silence, but everyone was watching. The whispers had begun. My mother came back 5 minutes later. Her face was red. She walked straight to me. She said, "How dare you?" Her voice was low, shaking. "How dare you do this at your sister's wedding?" I said, "I asked to give a speech. You said no." She said, "Because I knew you'd do something like this." I said, "Then you knew I had something to say." Patricia stepped between us. "Susan, I asked Meyer a question. She answered honestly. That's not something to punish." My mother stared at her. "This is none of your business." Patricia said, "My son just married your daughter. That makes it my business, and I don't like secrets." Robert joined them. He looked at me. "Maya, I'd like to hear the full story. Would you be willing to talk?" I looked at my mother. She looked at the ground. I said, "Yes." Robert said, "Let's find a quiet table." I told them everything. The letters, the aunt, the business partner, the years of silence. My mother sat across from me, arms crossed, not denying a word. My father kept his eyes on the tablecloth. Chloe was crying again, but she was listening. Daniel held her hand. When I finished, Patricia said, "Susan, I'm disappointed." My mother flinched. Patricia continued, "You raised a daughter who was brave enough to tell the truth, and instead of being proud, you tried to hide her." My mother said, "You don't understand." Patricia said, "I understand that you taught Chloe to keep secrets. I won't have that in my family." My mother stood up. She walked away. My father followed. They didn't look back. Robert turned to me. "Maya, I'm sorry you went through that, and I'm glad you spoke." Chloe looked at me. She said, "I didn't know about the letters, I swear." I said, "I know." She said, "Can we talk later?" I said, "Whenever you're ready." The reception wound down. People left early. The cake sat half-eaten. The string quartet packed up. Patricia and Robert stayed until the end. They offered me a ride home. I said I'd drive myself. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It said, "This is Daniel. Thank you for telling the truth. Chloe needs time, but I think she'll come around, and I'll make sure she does." I sat in my car for a long time. The tent lights went out one by one. The country club went dark. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the letters. I thought about the simple truth that had cost me years of family. But I also thought about Patricia and Robert, strangers who had believed me, who had stood up for me, who had seen me. I started the car. I drove home, and I knew that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the recording in my head. I wondered if Chloe would ever forgive me. I wondered if my parents would ever speak to me again. But I also knew that I had done the only thing I could. I had told the truth. Now the question was, what would the truth cost all of us? 3 days after the wedding, Chloe showed up at my door. She wasn't crying anymore. She was furious. She walked past me into my apartment without a word. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed. She said, "Mom told me you lied." I closed the door. "About what?" she said, about Grandma, about the letters. I said, I didn't lie, I have the letters. She stared at me. Show me. I went to my closet. I pulled out the shoebox where I kept them. 13 letters, all in my grandmother's handwriting. I handed them to Chloe. She sat on my couch and read them, one by one. Her face changed. She started crying again. She said, these are real. I said, yes. She said, Mom said you forged them. I said she would say that. Chloe set the letters down. She looked at me. Why didn't you tell me before? I said, I tried. You didn't want to hear it. She was quiet. Then she said, I'm sorry. 2 words. They landed like stones. But that wasn't the worst part. Chloe told me something I didn't know. Mom has been telling everyone you're unstable, she said. She called Patricia and said you have a history of mental illness. She said you made up the story about Uncle Mark, too. I felt cold. Did Patricia believe her? Chloe shook her head. Patricia asked for proof. Mom couldn't provide any, but the damage is done. Half the family thinks you're lying. I sat down. The air went out of the room. My mother wasn't just trying to silence me. She was trying to destroy my credibility. And she had been doing it for years. That's why I was the difficult one. That's why no one believed me. I said, I can prove everything. The letters, the bank documents about Uncle Mark, I have copies. Chloe looked at me. Then do it. Call Patricia, send her everything. I hesitated. It will destroy Mom. Chloe said, she destroyed herself. You're just showing the wreckage. I called Patricia that evening. I sent her scans of the letters and the bank statements. She called back the next morning. She said, Maya, I've spoken to my lawyer. This is serious. Your mother committed fraud against her own brother, and your father was complicit. I said, what are you going to do? She said, that's up to your sister and Daniel, but I will not let this stand. The next week, Robert and Patricia invited Chloe, Daniel, my parents, and me to a meeting at their house. No lawyers, just family. My mother walked in looking like she hadn't slept in days. My father followed, silent. I sat across from them. Patricia started the conversation. Susan, I have seen the documents. I have read the letters. Do you have an explanation? My mother said nothing. Robert said, if you don't speak, we'll draw our own conclusions. My mother finally looked at me. She said, I did what I had to do to protect this family. I said, protect us from what? She said, from the truth. I said, the truth is what sets us free. You buried it. She said, you don't understand. I said, I understand that you isolated Grandma. You lied about Uncle Mark. You made me the villain so no one would look at you. She started crying. I was trying to keep us together. I said, you tore us apart. Chloe spoke. Mom, I love you, but I can't defend you anymore. Daniel nodded. My father finally spoke. We need help, all of us. My mother looked at him. She didn't argue. Patricia said, I suggest family therapy if you're willing. My mother said nothing, but she didn't say no. The meeting ended. Chloe hugged me for the first time in years. She whispered, I'm sorry it took this long. I held her and didn't let go. Walking to my car that night, I checked my phone. A text from my mother. 3 words, I'm sorry too. I didn't reply, but I saved it. That was the beginning of the long, slow work. Not revenge, not victory. Just the truth, finally spoken, and a family that had to decide whether they wanted to face it together. But there was still one more secret I hadn't uncovered. One that would change everything I thought I knew about my mother, and I was about to find it. The secret I hadn't uncovered wasn't about my mother's lies. It was about why she started lying in the first place. 2 weeks after the family meeting, I was cleaning out my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. My mother had asked me to help clear the attic for a garage sale. She didn't say much. We worked in silence. Then I found a box under the eaves, duct tape sealed, labeled in my mother's handwriting, Susan before. I opened it. Inside were photographs, a class ring, and a spiral notebook. The notebook was dated 30 years ago, my mother's maiden name on the cover. I opened it and started reading. It was her journal from age 16 to 18, and it told a story I never knew. My mother had grown up in a house just like the one she built. Her father was a businessman. Her mother was a socialite. They had expectations. Straight A's, perfect behavior, the right friends. But my mother fell in love with a boy her parents didn't approve of. His name was Tommy. He worked at a gas station. Her parents forbade her from seeing him. She kept seeing him anyway. When they found out, they grounded her for 3 months, took away her phone, threatened to send her to boarding school. Then something worse happened. Tommy died. A car accident. My mother was 17. She was devastated. She wrote in the journal, "I have no one to talk to. Mom says it's my fault for disobeying. Dad says I should focus on school. They don't understand that half of me is gone." I kept reading. The entries grew darker. She wrote about feeling invisible, about wanting to run away, about hating herself for causing trouble. Then an entry from the month she turned 18. "I made a decision. I will be the daughter they want. I will smile. I will marry someone they approve of. I will never let anyone see the real me again. The real me died with Tommy." I closed the journal. My hands were shaking. My mother had been silenced too, not by lies but by grief. She had learned that the only way to survive was to bury her truth. And then she raised me in the same house she had been raised in. She taught me the same lesson. Keep quiet, be perfect, don't rock the boat. But I had rocked it anyway, and that terrified her. I walked downstairs. My mother was at the kitchen table, folding old towels. I set the journal in front of her. She looked at it, her face drained of color. She said, "Where did you find that?" I said, "In the attic." She didn't touch it. She said, "I forgot I kept it." I said, "I read it." She closed her eyes. "Then you know," I said, "I know you were hurt, but that doesn't excuse what you did to me or to Grandma or to Uncle Mark." She said, "I know." Then she said something I never expected. "I was trying to protect you from the same pain, but I only passed it on." I sat down across from her. "Mom, I'm not going to hate you, but I need you to stop hiding." She nodded. She started crying, not the defensive tears from before, real ones. We sat there for an hour. She told me about Tommy, about her parents, about the years of pretending, about how, when Grandma got depressed, she saw her own mother in her and couldn't handle it, so she cut her off, the same way her parents had cut her off. I didn't forgive her in that moment, but I understood her, and understanding is the first step. Therapy started the next month, all of us. Chloe, Daniel, my parents, and me, we met every other Sunday. The first sessions were hard. My mother had to sit and listen to me describe the years of silence, the letters, the accusations. She had to hear Chloe say she felt guilty for being the favorite. She had to hear my father admit he enabled her. She broke down twice, but she stayed. After 3 months, something shifted. My mother wrote a letter to Uncle Mark. She admitted everything. She sent it with a check for the money my father had taken. Mark wrote back. He said, "It's too late for a relationship, but I appreciate the truth." It wasn't forgiveness. It was accountability. That mattered. Chloe and I started having coffee every Saturday. At first awkward, then easier. We talked about our childhood. We laughed about the blanket forts. We cried about the lost years. She said, "I wish I had been braver." I said, "You were a kid. We both were. We're brave now." And there was one more surprise, the final one. 6 months after the wedding, I received a certified letter from an attorney I didn't know. It was from my grandmother's estate. She had left a small savings account, forgotten by everyone, that had been accruing interest. The letter said, "Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law." No, wait, that was the other story. In this case, the attorney's name was different. The letter said my grandmother had named me as the sole beneficiary. The account held $23,000. There was also a handwritten note tucked inside the legal documents. It said, "For Maya, use it to build a life where you never have to be silent. I love you, Grandma." I sat on my couch and held that note. I thought about the letters. I thought about the wedding. I thought about the recording. And I realized that my grandmother had been watching over me all along, not from beyond the grave, but through the truth she had tried to leave behind. It had taken years for it to reach me, but it reached me. I used part of the money to start a small scholarship at the community college for students who had been silenced in their own families. Not a grand gesture, just a way to turn pain into purpose. Chloe and Daniel had a baby girl a year later. They named her Violet. My mother cried when she held her. I stood in the hospital room, watching. Chloe caught my eye and smiled. At the baptism, Patricia and Robert sat next to my parents. Small talk, careful but genuine. My mother held the baby. She looked at me over Violet's head. She mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded. Not everything was fixed. My father still struggled to talk about the past. My mother still had moments of defensiveness. Chloe and I had arguments, but we were speaking. That was everything. There's one more thing. The recording, I still have it on my phone. Sometimes I listen to it late at night, not because I need to hear my own voice, but because I need to remember the day I stopped being afraid. That recording wasn't an attack. It was an anchor. It held me to the truth when everyone else was drifting. The wedding wasn't ruined. It was cracked open, and through the crack, light came in. Now, if you're listening to this, and you've ever been told to stay quiet, to be smaller, to keep the peace at the cost of your own soul, I want you to hear me clearly. Your voice is not the problem. The silence is. You don't have to wait for a wedding or a letter or a perfect moment. You can start with one sentence, one honest sentence, and then another. The truth doesn't always set you free immediately. Sometimes it costs you. But in the end, it's the only thing that's yours. So here's my question for you. What is one truth you've been holding onto that you're ready to speak? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs permission to use their voice. Before you go, I want to leave you with this. My grandmother's last letter ended with a line I'll never forget. The world needs more people who refuse to disappear. Don't disappear. I'll see you in the next story. That night at the wedding changed everything, but not because of what it broke, because of what it started. I think a lot about the word family and what it really means. For years, I thought it meant blood. I thought it meant silence. I thought it meant swallowing the truth to keep the peace. But I was wrong. Family isn't the people who share your last name. It's the people who share your courage, the people who see you fully and don't look away. Patricia and Robert became my family that night. Chloe became my family again. And eventually, even my mother started to become someone I could know. Not all stories end cleanly. Ours didn't. My father still struggles to look me in the eye. My mother still reaches for control when she feels scared. Chloe and I still have hard conversations. But that's the thing about truths. They're not magic spells. They're doors. You have to walk through them. And sometimes you have to walk back through them again. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of your own difficult truth, I want you to know something. You don't have to be perfect at it. You don't have to say everything at once. You just have to start. One sentence, one conversation, one recording, one tiny crack of light. My grandmother's story reached me years after she was gone. Your truth might not land today, but it will land, and it will matter. I still keep the recording on my phone. I play it sometimes when I need to remember that I was brave. Not perfect, brave. Chloe and I took Violet to the lake last summer. She's 2 now. She threw rocks into the water and laughed. My mother came too. She sat on a blanket and watched my grandmother's great-granddaughter splash in the same lake where my grandmother once sat. There was no spectacular apology, no dramatic reconciliation. Just 3 generations of women, breathing the same air, finally able to look at each other without flinching. That's enough. That's everything. So here's my question for you. What truth are you carrying that's too heavy to keep silent? Not for a speech, not for a wedding, just for the next conversation you have with someone you love. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs permission to be seen. Before I go, I want you to remember what my grandmother wrote in her last letter. The world needs more people who refuse to disappear. That's your permission. Take it. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here for the next story. I'll be waiting. Take care of yourself. Take care of your truth. And I'll see you again soon.